Okay, welcome back. That was a motion for a new trial. That was Jason Van Dyke's defense attorney trying to argue that the law was not properly followed, the weight of the evidence did not justify a conviction. That motion is typically made. I'd like to bring in, and it's an honor, my next guest. We had him in a couple of weeks ago, and there was a lot of great audience reaction to him. Julio Briones, my friend. Julio, welcome to the show. Okay. Julio's actually written a book, if we can get tight into there, Surviving Arrest. He's written a number of books, and he's a lecturer. He has a consulting business as well as, and one of the reasons you're here, prison consulting. That's how I came to know you. And I think that there'd be nobody better in the world than you in that, and I've actually referred clients to you to help us out and assist us, because you have a fascinating story yourself, having been convicted of a crime. You were given decades in state prison based upon some pretty savvy legal work that you did. You got that reduced to a 12-year sentence. You got out. You did the right thing. You got yourself employed in your own job, and now you have a thriving consulting business. You're writing books. You're lecturing to bar associations. I know that we lectured together, New Jersey State Bar Association, and you're like a go-to person on the government side for prisoner reentry and reform, such as things like that. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what the business does?
Yeah, well, my company, what we actually do is we prepare individuals to come in and to go through the process of arrest. This involves everything from analyzing the person's life. Let's get things in place for senior care if we need to, for child care, for any business management that needs to happen, because the reality is the majority of the clients that I deal with are eventually going to come back. They're coming back into society. They need to find jobs. They need to run their business, and they need their family back together. So I help them get through.
Julio, you have a unique perspective that nobody that's certainly sat at this desk, because we've only been here today, but probably in this network, I've never seen it with any other network, and that's why I love talking to you. So what is it like to be a defendant, to be convicted? Your story is fascinating. I mean, you never said that you didn't do it. You believed you were overcharged, and in fact, you were oversentenced. And your story is fascinating about how you really got pummeled through the criminal justice system. And part of that was that your lawyer showed up as a person who I don't believe ever tried a case. A young lawyer, wasn't the initial lawyer that you had. They didn't have any preparation on the case. But when you got convicted, I love those stories that you talk about the first couple of nights in your complete disbelief. You've been in the military, you got out, went a little wayward there, and then in a singular night, you wound up in a very bad situation. But a motion like this was actually made for you. But if I understand, Julio, you didn't even get to appear in court.
No, when my attorney filed the motion for a new trial, I just got a notice in the mail a couple of weeks later at the county jail. I wasn't even told that they were going to prepare this for me.
And that seems to be a consistent theme that went on with regard to your representation. And these were privately retained attorneys. It's not the public defender's office. It's an amazing, fascinating story. We have Julio here for a reason, because we're going to do a little bit of a breakdown on a couple of the most recent cases that we've handled and get a little handle on an idea like, what does a life look like for a Van Dyke, a Christopher Watts, a Denise Williams? I think you'll be fascinated when you hear it. I was last night talking to Julio. We're going to be back on the other end of the break. Okay, that's the records guy talking about what this report was. Julio, one thing again that I find very interesting with you is that you were a paralegal in the prison and had an opportunity to help a lot of prisoners out with regard to reviewing of police reports and things that lawyers missed, and actually assist other people at getting out for mistakes that were made at trial. So in this case, as I indicated before, March, who's one of the defendants in this cop cover-up trial, indicates that he shot McDonald, that is Van Dyke, because he was being attacked. And then he indicates that Van Dyke was backpedaling to stop the attack. I'm going to ask our producers in a minute to show the video, not now, but let's keep this in mind. Backpedaled Julio, and then they indicate that he fell to the ground, and he continued to move, thrashing around with the knife, attempting to get up, putting Van Dyke at serious threat of his life. And let's take just a real quick look at that video. Remember, Van Dyke backpedaled. He was committing, they're arguing, March is arguing, committing an aggravated assault on the officers. Then after he shot, he's trying to get back up to use the knife. And that Van Dyke is backpedaling and continues to shoot because he's in fear of his life. You just take a look. I mean, no other officers are shooting. And they cut out there, but what happens is he goes down on the ground, and you can clearly know from having seen the video before, he wasn't trying to get up or attempting to get up and didn't pose a serious risk. Is this something that you found common in the prison system, that you would review these reports against the other evidence and say, how could they come to these conclusions?
Well, one of the big things that I specialized in when I was learning how to help guys get out of prison was a lot of the aggravating mitigating factors and this evidence that's used against for sentencing. And a lot of the times you'll find that in the reports, things that are in the evidence, in the trial notes, in the transcripts don't match what is said and what's attempted to be presented. And then it's really a nightmare to have to pull those knots apart and to try to show how it is that they were unjustly and overly sentenced in many instances.
Well, let me ask you, I mean, like, you have a videotape here, and based on your experience on an angle that we never have had in our lives, and now as a consultant, I mean, it's pretty brazen to write a report like that when you have a videotape, and again, we're taking a look at the video, that clearly belies what's being said. What March essentially did was took the testimony that Van Dyke gave and just basically bought it and didn't even, I guess, wash it against this video.
Well, I mean, this is something that run into a lot. I actually work with a gentleman that does investigation consulting himself, like breaks apart these investigations, because things like this happen way too often, and it's such a common occurrence in a lot of processes where cops are involved, or cops are the defendant, or there's just something that doesn't quite sit right, that paperwork gets doctored relatively often. These body cameras are some of the best things that could have happened to everybody out there.
Yeah, and Julio, listen, I'm a huge cop supporter. I was in charge of 44 police agencies for a considerable period of time, but it is unacceptable in today's day and age, or any day and age, but now that you have these cams, it shows to me that you feel either a level of arrogance or that you don't think that you're ever going to be held accountable, that you can do whatever you can to cover up. I'm not saying all cops do this, because most don't do it, but it happened here, and it tells me more about the department than necessarily the individual officers. We got to go to break. We'll be right back. Oh my gosh, we are really moving here at the Law and Crime Network. Julio Briones is still with me. Thank you, Brian, for that last segment. It was amazing. Julio, one of the reasons we got you on here today is because you can give us an intimate understanding of three big cases that we covered gavel to gavel, but three very different defendants who are going to go to jail. And I want to talk to you a little bit about them. This is going to be the Jason Van Dyke, that's the police officer who shot and killed Laquan McDonald. Chris Watts, that's the guy who killed his 15-week pregnant wife and his two baby girls, Celeste and Bella, who were 3 and 4 years old. And then Denise Williams, who was just convicted in the case that we were just covering right now for having conspired with Brian Winchester to kill Mike Williams. So let's take a look at first Van Dyke. Talk to me in a brief span of time, because we talked about this before. What is a cop going to the jail looking at with all three of them? Is he in the worst shape there, and if so, why?
Okay, it's really going to depend if the victim really was part of a gang, then his life is going to be very short and painful.
There were some allegations of that.
Yes.
How is it going to be short and painful exactly?
Because in the system, they're going to, one, he's at a disadvantage because he is white, another one because he is a former police officer, and because he killed a gang member, assuming that those allegations are true, he's walking in probably to what's called a green light or a kill on command, kill on sight order. So there's nowhere really he's going to be able to hide.
Is it that structured a thing when you get this green light? I assume some sort of boss, if some gang says that, and can protective custody save him?
Not at all. There's nothing but time in prison, and if they want to get to him, they're going to get to him. Whether he goes into protective custody, he's eventually got to go to medical, he's going to have to come out to shower. There are trustees that go into the areas where protective custody inmates are housed to clean. They could put something as simple as take infected blood and put it into his food with hepatitis or with HIV. There's nothing but time. They'll kill him quickly or slowly.
And what about the guards? Are they inclined to protect him, being a fellow officer?
Not at all. One, they're going to worry about themselves, and two, it's really going to depend on his personal attitude and behavior in there. But generally speaking, police officers are not very well protected by corrections officers unless it is truly a justified in the eyes of the corrections officer unless what that officer did is truly justified.
Okay.
And I don't believe it is.
So you think Jason Van Dyke is in for a really difficult time?
Yeah, I don't give him very long lifespan.
Chris Watts, real quick. I think we have something that we can throw to real quick. A prosecutor talking about Watts. That's the head prosecutor that prosecuted Christopher Watts. Julio, it's no surprise that I think it was a week or so ago that we find out that he had to be removed to an undisclosed location because he was already having problems in prison. I say that this case, while Denise Williams was a twisted, weird, cold, callous case, it doesn't get any worse than you kill your wife that's 15 weeks pregnant, put her in a shallow ditch, take Bella and Celeste, 3 and 4 years old, stick them in a drum of crude oil, on separate drums, by the way, of crude oil and water, and then feign like your missing wife and your missing kids. Woe is me. What's his life looking like in prison?
He's a dead man walking. I mean, there's really no other way to describe his situation at this point. There's a reason they're moving him. They're going to get it. There's no doubt about this. It's not even a matter of racial thing at this point. It's just going to be, this guy did something so heinous, it's so offensive, even to the people that are inside, that he's just going to have the most horrible, tortured life, and a very short one at that.
You know, I think maybe the audience doesn't kind of get this. They're kind of looking like, well, everybody that's in jail is a bad guy or bad girl or whatever. But there definitely is a culture of them judging people's crimes and making a point of taking guys like Chris Watts out.
Well, in the prison system, one of the things that people fail to understand, unless you've been there, is that just because someone's in there, it does not mean that they have no morality. There's actually a very strict moral code inside. You hear it a lot in the old mobster movies. No women, no children. That's a real life belief inside. So men that violate this end up having a much harsher life in the prison system. And when you talk about killing children, your life is less than meaningless. He'll probably spend the rest of his life in some sort of solitary, because that's what protective custody is. And he will be tortured by both corrections officers, by staff, and he'll probably be receiving a lot of hate mail because people will figure out where he is.
So, given Jason Van Dyke versus him, who's got a better chance of surviving in prison, although both of their situations look bleak? That's
tough. That's very tough. It's all going to come down to whether or not there really was gang involvement in the Van Dyke case. Mm-hmm. If there wasn't, Van Dyke's got a longer life than Chris Watts.
Right. I mean, when you're talking about the killing of a pregnant woman and innocent children, I just can't imagine that Chris Watts wouldn't be considered, and maybe you can correct me, you know the scenario, like the worst that you could get in the prison. Maybe there's something worse.
If they were both in the same prison, I would put my money on Van Dyke living longer than Watts if there's no gang involvement, and the other way around if there is.
Now, okay, that's an excellent point. Let me ask you, is there a sensibility that with a guy like Chris Watts that they'll actually kind of torture the guy before they kill him? I mean, do they mess with the guy?
Well, I'll tell you a real-life scenario. There's a gentleman that I was incarcerated with that did that. He killed his wife, cut her head off in front of the 2 children. They tortured this guy for years until he ended up killing himself. He actually killed himself in 2012. After having been arrested in, I believe, 2004. They tortured him for 8 years.
Wow. So, I mean, there is a sense of that, like, you know, we're going to make it painful, kill you by paper cuts if it
yes.
All right. What about Denise Williams?
Denise Williams, if she plays it right when she goes into the system, which I believe she will, just judging from what I've seen of the trial, she's going to play the woe is me, I'm a victim, I always was a victim. I didn't even mean to turn anything on its head. I went to the police seeking help because of domestic violence. Now, Winchester, on the other hand, I think his life is going to be very hellish compared to Denise, simply because you don't use your woman as a shield. He turned her in, testified against her, And one, that makes you a rat, and two, it makes you a coward because you needed a woman to take the fall for you.
Wow, Jaime, you don't use a woman as your shield, and that's part of the code too. So in this whole thing, assuming that each are equally responsible, you believe that they will see Winchester as a coward and a person that used the woman as a shield?
Yes, and they'll see Williams as a victim of an abuser.
Right, and of course, and generally speaking, I would assume that a female prison scenario is safer physically than typically a male scenario.
Not always. It depends on the environment and what the charges are. Because even in the women's prison, there's a very strict hierarchy of crimes.
Okay, if you had a quick, with each one, real quick, I only got 30 seconds, what would you advise, the number one piece of advice for Van Dyke, Watts, and Williams if you were consulting?
Van Dyke, I would say check in the PC and try not to leave your cell. Same thing with Watts. Minimal contact is the rule. And for Williams, it's simple. Play up your victim status. It'll keep you alive and it'll keep you safe longer. And as long as she doesn't mess with anybody, stay away from the drugs and everything else, she'll be fine.
Wow, amazing insights, Julio. I really appreciate that because we don't, we often, I say to you, you go into the mist once you leave that courtroom, and we as lawyers and judges really don't know what goes on behind the scenes. You can only get this kind of coverage at the Law and Crime Network. We're going to break. We'll be right back.